they didn't really have all the commandments until the revelation of Mount Sinai revealed them all.
Well, so that's then a debate. There is a midrash that all of the patriarchs kept all of the commandments, but trying to understand what that means and preventing it from being a hyper literal understanding, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, is kind of something that's a bit of a controversy depending upon who you're talking to. Because there are certain things like, Jacob not, what would be the word? Jacob not eating the sciatic nerve because he would eventually wrestle and have his leg twisted. Why would Abraham have been keeping that? So it's a little bit more subtle than just they kept all the commandments. All right, just getting everything lined up. Okay. And we need to go here. All right. And now we wait, because it's just turned 7 o'clock, and we wait until everyone else has shown up.
But when you say it's more subtle than that, the Rambam said there was a reason for all the commandments. So wouldn't it make sense that it would be impossible to at least figure out some of the commandments through your own line of reasoning, or no?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that there is a reason doesn't mean that everybody can find that reason. Right? I mean, that's the famous, example of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer, as still escaping even Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon's understanding. But yeah, I mean, we recognize that most societies have figured out some of them by themselves, like don't murder or don't steal. But even those are not universally understood or have far too many exceptions. And then when you get into the more subtle commandments or the subtle details, it's too much to ask that an individual would be able to, using only their reason, come to the right conclusion.
Right, and I thought that's why they said they weren't able to try to understand it in its entirety, or at least know them in the entirety to the revelation.
Well, for the average person, absolutely. And as we've seen from studying Mishnah together now, even if you have the full text of the Torah, that doesn't mean that you understand everything in its entirety. There's still a lot more to unpack than the average person can do on their own. I'm just going to send, because I forgot to send the link out for the Mishnah. Where's my link? Meeting info. Forgot to send this out to the WhatsApp. There we go.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Good evening.
A question for you, Rabbi. Now, before you start with the class.
Yes.
Yesterday, I had the shiur with the Latinos about Rosh Hashanah.
Right. Yes.
And I used the Zoom, but after 40 minutes, they cut me. I wasn't connected. And I remember that you told me that you connected me.
Yeah, well, yes and no. So you are one of our connected people, but sometimes I have to rotate it for other people. And I forgot, Rashi, I don't remember hearing exactly when you were doing the class, and so I didn't set you back up again.
Okay, that was a problem, because suddenly after 45 minutes, we were in the middle of a beautiful discussion, and it's connected.
I've done that to myself, where I've passed the other accounts to someone else, and then when I'm doing, Minion, it happened once, it cut me off. So yeah, it's I have to know in advance who's using the second account at a given time to make sure that they get the full level.
Okay, got it. Well, good to know. I was concerned because I said, wow, I have the two programs with the Masorti movement under my account, and I don't want that it will be cut after 40 minutes.
No. You just remind me, like a day or so before, and I can switch you back over.
Okay, no problem.
Sometimes I just need that reminder. Okay, well, we've given our usual little bit of wait. I don't want to wait too long. I'm cautiously optimistic we might be able to finish Taanit tonight.
So we need to decide, Rabbi, the next Masechet.
Let's get through
Okay.
it, and then when we get to the end, we can plan out the next one.
Okay.
All right, so let's get going. We've got a great story to start with, and then we'll go from there. So we're in chapter 3, and this is Mishnah number 8, sorry. For every trouble that should not come upon the community, they sound a blast, except on account of too much rain. So double negatives don't work so great in English. Basically, it means that for any problem, they sound the shofar. However, if it is a case of too much rain, they do not blow the shofar, meaning that too much rain is not something that triggers the shofar blast. We're going to come back to this concept, but first we have a story. It happened that they said to Honi the circle drawer. Right, so this is a figure, a character that appears a few times in the rabbinic texts. They said
actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rabbi, to
Go
add
ahead.
about him, because I was studying about him a few weeks ago. Actually, he was the last figure that allowed the rabbi to invoke the direct presence and intervention of God in our world. After him, they say, no, it's not Bashaman, it's for us. So from then on, they didn't accept more miracles in the decisions. So,
Right.
so Yoni was the last one.
No, exactly. And we're going to see that even though he does what can only be called a miracle for the community, the rabbis are not 100% comfortable with what happens. So, Honi the circle drawer, they ask him, pray for rain to fall. All right, so first of all, we've got the very interesting question here that he is being asked to pray on behalf of the community. But why can't the community pray? Why can't anyone else pray? There is a bit of a feeling during this generation that certain people were more successful in their prayers than others.
More tzaddikim.
Well, it's not just a question of being a tzaddik, because lots of the sages were considered tzaddikim. They were considered to be righteous people. And the idea of the tzaddik in the modern Hasidic sense is modern. It's only a couple hundred years old. So it's not just a question of, was he righteous enough? It's a question of, did he have some special way of praying, some special connection? Was there something about his emunah, about his faith, that created a different impact when he prayed? And that's, something that is very difficult to wrap our heads around, because the rabbis certainly were more than capable of praying, and we hear their prayers being answered in many cases. Why was he being singled out, and why was he so confident? That is a much bigger question, because we hear his response. He replied, go and bring in the Pesach ovens so that they do not dissolve. So the Pesach ovens refer to these big outdoor ovens that were made to be able to cook the Passover food. And they were made out of clay, and they would be kept outside. And if there was a huge downpour, a big rainstorm, like we get here in Florida, then they would cause the clay to soften, and it would eventually destroy them. So basically he's saying, sure, I'll pray. In fact, I'm going to pray so successfully, bring in all the stuff that might get damaged by the rain. This is what you might call cocky, or in Yiddish, you might call it chutzpah. He prayed, and no rain fell, right? Womp, womp, right? It's like he sets up, I'm going to go out and pray, and it's going to pray so hard, you want to bring in your ovens. And then nothing happens. What did he do? He drew a circle and stood within it and exclaimed before him, meaning before God, Master of the universe, your children have turned their faces to me because I am like one who was born in your house. All right, so the same way that if you wanted to ask a favor of the household master, you would ask somebody who came from his household rather than asking someone else outside the household to ask. So he's basically saying, I am on a more intimate connection with you, God. Again, slightly arrogant. So they came to me. The community depends on me, right? I swear by your great name that I will not move from here, meaning from his circle, until you have mercy upon your children. So he is basically drawing a line in the sand, literally, and he is standing in the middle of it, and he is daring God not to rain because he is now committed to standing in that spot until the rain comes. It's the physical equivalent of a hunger strike, or the equivalent of chaining yourself to the gate as a sign of protest. He is trying to show God that he is that convinced that rain will come, that he is vowing not to move from that spot until it does. Now, does this represent arrogance? Possibly. That is one interpretation. Does this represent emunah, his faith, his belief, that he knows that God would not let him stay and die in that circle? That's another way to interpret it. But what's important to know is the rain then began to drip. So there begins to be a light sprinkle. And he exclaimed, I did not request this, meaning the light sprinkle, but rain which fills the cisterns, right? I'm looking for rain that is going to fill up the water tanks. We talked about that in an earlier Mishnah. Cisterns, ditches, and caves. The rain began to come down in great force. And he exclaimed, I did not request this, meaning the powerful, driving, destroying rain, but pleasing rain of blessing and abundance. Rain then fell in the normal way until the Jews in Jerusalem had to go up to the Temple Mount because of the rain. So the rain moderates and it comes back at an even level, but even then it is so much rain that the lower city of Jerusalem begins to overflow, begins to flood. And so the people have to move up to the Temple Mount, which is the higher level of the city. It's something that's not always easy to visualize in the modern world because of the way the city of Jerusalem has expanded and been built up. But at one time, the Temple Mount was the highest occupied area of residence in that vicinity of Jerusalem, which of course is built on hills. They came to him and said to him, in the same way that you prayed for the rain to fall, pray for the rain to stop, right? Basically, we've had enough, and if it keeps going on, it's going to be dangerous. He replied, go and see if the stone of people claiming lost objects has washed away. All right. So there was this rock in Jerusalem where people would come, especially on the pilgrimage festivals, and they would go up on the rock and they would say, I found such and such cloak. I found such and such donkey. And people would have to come and say, this is the siman, this is the marker on it that will let me identify that it is mine. And what he is basically saying is, did the rock float away? The answer, of course, is it would be impossible for the rock to float away. So he is telling them, I am not going to pray for the blessing of rain to stop. Right? Make sure you understand that. He is saying that even though you are now uncomfortable or afraid of how much rain is coming down, we're not allowed to pray for the rain of blessing to stop. We can pray for too little rain to increase. We can pray for too much rain to stop, meaning like a driving, dangerous flood rain, but just an overflowing rain of abundance, that I'm not going to pray for it to stop. All right, questions before we hit the response?
No, Rabbi, it reminds me that I think it was last year when there was a huge flood in Jerusalem and the rabbis were saying, please stop praying for rain.
Yes.
It reminded me of that.
It's one thing not to pray for additional rain. It's another thing to say, we don't want any more blessing, right? As we've talked about multiple times throughout this Masechet, rain is so important in the agriculture of Israel. Praying against what would be a normal, proper rain just seems wrong.
Rabbi, yes, that was exactly their thought too. And a lot of people were actually enjoying the flood kind of thing. I mean, you know, they showed videos of different people trying to get in the bus, and there was so much flood everywhere, but yet they didn't complain because they saw it as a blessing, but they just didn't want too much of them.
And as Natan mentioned, earlier, the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, was well filled last year because of that.
Oh, yes.
So the rabbis respond, or at least Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach responds. They sent to him, meaning sent him a note, a slight rebuke, but done in a very polite way. Were you not Honi, meaning if you weren't who you are, I would have excommunicated you. But what can I do for you? Or what can I do to you? For you are spoiled before God, and he does your will like a son that is spoiled before his father, and his father does his request. Concerning you, it is written, let your father and mother rejoice, and let she that bore you rejoice. So what Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach is saying is that you arrogant, smug, but you get the results, right? But it seems that God doesn't have a problem with you. And if God doesn't have a problem with you, I can't have a problem with you. But no one else should think to act with the cockiness that you display. This is why you don't see later rabbis drawing circles in the ground and going out and standing in them and demanding that God acquiesce to their demands. Or at least you didn't until you began to get much later in Jewish history. Later on with the Shabbatai Tzvi movement and the Frankist movement and other false messiahs, and then later on with the beginning of the Hasidic movement and the miracle working rebbes that become the dynastic heads of these different families, you begin to get some of this idea of people who can cajole or coerce God into behaving the way they want as having great standing in communities. But that is not normal and has not been normal for most of the last 2,000 years. Honi, as Natan was mentioning, was basically the last person that was allowed to play that game. And it wasn't until modern desperate times, either that led to false messiahs or that led to the mystical movements of the Hasidic groups, that you began to get people who thought they could demand miracles. But exactly how that fits into Judaism is probably beyond tonight's discussion. But questions or comments before we move on to Mishnah 9? Okay. Mishnah 9. What happens if you succeed? If while they are fasting, rain falls, meaning you declared a fast, the day has begun, and while you are fasting, it starts raining. Hooray! If before sunrise, meaning if the rain comes before sunrise, they do not complete the fast. If after sunrise, they do complete the fast. That is sort of the generic opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says, if before noon, they do not complete the fast. If after noon, they do complete it. So Rabbi Eliezer has a slightly more lenient or strict view, depending upon how you want to interpret this, that if the prayer has been answered and the fast has been acknowledged by the presence of rain, that as long as you have not taken the first real meal of the day, which happens after midday, then you can say that the day has not really begun, and therefore you can choose not to complete the fast, and you can eat during the rest of the day. So if the rain fell at 10 o'clock, you can have your normal lunch meal. He is basically saying that we need to acknowledge that this has happened and acknowledge that the fast doesn't really begin until you miss that first main meal. Again, a reminder that most people did not eat what we would call breakfast. They would eat their midday meal and they would eat an evening meal. Those were the two meals that most people would eat in a regular day. And I should point out that the halakha in the Talmud is established according to Rabbi Eliezer. He wins this argument. It happened, meaning again, we have an actual case study of this. It happened that the rabbis decreed a fast in Lod, and rain fell before noon. Rabbi Tarfon said to them, go, eat and drink and make a holiday. They went and ate and drank and observed the day as a holiday, and at evening time they came and recited the Hallel Hagadol. right? Ki le'olam chasdo, right? God's mercy, God's kindness is for all times. So they created the rest of the day as a full holiday. Rather than merely terminating their fast, they actually flipped the entire day into a joyful celebration. Questions or comments before we move on to chapter 4?
That was a
The
lot.
halakha went by Rabbi Eliezer
Yes.
before or after his death, because he was excommunicated. That was after his death or before?
So it's basically it's agreed upon in the Gemara, in the Talmud, which would be technically after his death, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't accepted prior to the Talmud writing. It just means that's where we get the record of that decision. So this, by the way, continues to be somewhat felt in modern halakha, although we don't have this type of specific community fast day, but on regular fast days, there are many people that if a person has a dietary reason that fasting an entire day is problematic for them, then fasting through the morning of the day will often be considered that they fasted for the bulk of the day. They fasted during the main period that would have been the marker in the ancient world. All right, chapter 4. Let's see what we can do. We're going to do a little deviation and then get some very interesting commentary, I think. On 3 occasions during the year, meaning on fast days, on the Ma'amadot, and on Yom Kippur, the priests lift up their hands to bless the people. This is what's known as Nisiyat Kapayim, the priestly blessing. So on 3 occasions during the year, on the fast days, on the Ma'amadot, and on Yom Kippur. Now, what is the Ma'amadot? So the Ma'amadot, we're going to see a lot more about in the next Mishnah, so I'm going to leave that off for the moment. But basically, short version is that is the special division of the nation, the Kohanim and Leviim, into 24 different sections in order that the different groups would serve the temple at different times. The rotation. But let's leave that to one side because the next Mishnah will talk about that in much more detail. So on 3 occasions, right, they would have these special blessings. However, they would do it 4 times on different days. And that means if on Shacharit, Musaf, and Mincha, and Ne'ilah, they would also do this Nesiyat Kapayim. Now, this is the halakha if you live in the land of Israel. If you live outside of Israel, we only do the priestly blessing on days when there is a Musaf, meaning the pilgrimage festivals, only those 3 days of pilgrimage festival, and Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. But the Shacharit and Mincha discussion here would be done on a regular basis. If you're in Israel and you go to Shacharit Minyan, you'll see that they do the blessing of the Kohanim during the repetition of the Amidah every day. And it's a very nice experience if you've never had a chance to do that. And Ne'ilah here is not just talking about the Yom Kippur Ne'ilah, but it's talking about the special service that would be held near the end of the day on a fast day, on these community-appointed fast days.
Sorry, Robert, can you repeat that? In Israel, you say the blessing of the priest of Kohanim every day.
Every day.
In a repetition.
Yes, exactly. The same way that we do it in our repetition on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and also commonly it's not unusual to do it on the Chagim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. In Israel, it's done every day.
For Mincha, for Shacharit and Musaf.
Well, so Musaf is only, of course, on days when Musaf happens.
But also for Mincha, for Shacharit and Mincha.
So I've seen different traditions regarding Mincha, but Shacharit definitely.
And in the diaspora, they don't do the repetition, the blessing for the Kohanim every day in the repetition?
Correct.
Because I saw that the Chabad, they do that.
So where did Chabad get their minhag? Where's Nusach from?
From Israel, that's why they do that.
Well, kind of, right? So, the Hasidic movements, when they began, especially in the 1800s, they rejected a lot of the Ashkenazic tradition. For being now one of the areas of, or one of the movements of Judaism that balks at any sort of change to liturgy, the Hasidic movement threw out the minhag of their ancestors, the Ashkenazic traditions, as having become corrupted in the diaspora. And they took the Sephardic minhag and then modified it based on their own understanding of mysticism. So they essentially created a whole new Siddur, which is why there are now basically 3 generally used Siddurim that are found in the Jewish world: the Ashkenazic Siddur, the Sephardic Siddur, and the Hasidic Siddur. So they adapted it in their own way, and they adapted it in their own thing. So you cannot call a Chabad service an Ashkenazic service. They may use Ashkenazic pronunciation rather than Sephardic pronunciation, but the Nusach, the actual layout of the liturgy, is a unusual blend of Sephardic and their own interpretation of Kabbalah.
Rabbi.
As you might say, they roll their own tobacco.
Rabbi, the conservative Siddur is mostly Ashkenazi, right?
The conservative Siddur in Ashkenazic countries is Ashkenazic. So all of the main Siddurim that have been printed by the conservative movement, so the Silverman Siddur, the Sim Shalom Siddur, the Lev Shalem Siddur, those have all been done according to Ashkenazic Nusach, the Ashkenazic style of the order of the prayers and the wording.
Do the South American one, the ones in Argentina, they use the same as well?
Well, yes, because something that's often misunderstood is that most of the South American communities are actually Ashkenazic communities, because they were mostly settled by people who came from Ashkenaz. Now, many people in South America have Jewish roots, but many of them did not come willingly. They came fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, and oftentimes they were forced to keep their Judaism secret, and in many cases even lost it altogether. And now many of them, thank God, are returning. But it means that for many of the main communities in Latin America, until very recently, the dominant communities were Ashkenazic communities that were formed only 100 or so, or 100, 200-ish years ago by people who were coming after the original settlers that came from Europe, from the Portuguese and Spanish areas.
Actually, in Uruguay, the Musach is Sephardi, not Ashkenazi.
Right.
Because the first Jews in Uruguay were from Turkey.
So
Turkey, they bring the Musach Sephardi, and the Ashkenazim that came after that, they continue the Musach of the place. So you see all the Ashkenazim praying like Sephardim.
Which is so beautiful about these different countries that have their own unique histories. Like in Uruguay, like you said, and actually I didn't know that the Uruguay, the first Jewish community, was really from Turkey. But Turkey has the Sephardic Nusach because the Jews who left Spain, many of them ended up in Turkey, and they created their imprint on the Turkish Jewish communities, which then went to South America. And now when the Ashkenazim arrived, they followed the Turkish pattern, meaning the Sephardic pattern, which had originated in Spain, but didn't go directly from Spain to Uruguay, even though they speak Spanish there. It had a detour of a few hundred years through Turkey. It's just amazing what you can understand about our history and how we've moved in different places by unpacking these little idiosyncrasies of different countries. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that about the community there. Aaron, you got your hand up.
Yes, Rabbi. Hey, just out of curiosity, if you're talking about Spain, although it's technically a Sephardic country, if it's Muslim Spain, they're more likely to follow the Sephardic religion. And if it's European Spain, is it more likely to be Ashkenazic?
No. So the real feel for Sephardic Spain happened when the entire peninsula was under Muslim rule.
Right.
So that was the dominant culture and style of Judaism in Spain when Spain was a very vibrant Jewish community. As the Reconquista happened, as the Catholic Spaniards came back into the peninsula. Well, I should point out there were plenty of Catholic Spaniards who stayed in the peninsula. As the Catholic Spanish royalty reconquered the peninsula, they were actually not inviting Jews from the rest of Europe to join them. They were instead telling the Jews who lived there, you guys are on notice, and eventually, of course, expelled them. So there was never a time under European, if you want to use that as a byword for Catholic royalty, there was never a time under Catholic royalty when you had a large French or German population moving in, because the Catholic royalty was much more hostile to the Jews who were living in Spain than, for most of the time, the Muslim majority was. Okay, Mishnah 2 of chapter 4. The big question, what are the ma'amadot, right? We've talked about them offhandedly a few times, and I've mentioned that these are the different rotations, different watch groups that come up to the temple. But here we actually get it spelled out for us. Since it is said, command the children of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food. Let me just scroll back up for those who want to read along, because this might be a familiar verse, right? Savet b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem et korbani lachmi, right? Anybody know where we see this routinely? Any of our Torah readers? This is the beginning in Parashat Pinchas of the discussion of the different sacrifices, beginning, of course, with Shabbat, and then going through Rosh Chodesh, and then going through all of the holidays. So this is one of the most frequently chanted sections of the Torah, but here they are using it not for the laws of the sacrifices of different days of holidays. This instead is telling us something else. It is telling us that the children of Israel, meaning all of us, are responsible for bringing food. Food meaning the sacrifices. How does this work, however? Now, how can a man's offering be offered and he is not present, right? How can you say that the offering is being done on behalf of the people of Israel if the people of Israel aren't there? Now, in the early days of the Mishkan, everybody was there, right? We were all there in the camp where the tabernacle was, and we were all present when a sacrifice would be made. Not present within the holy precincts, but we were at least in the city, the tent city, if you will. Therefore, the former prophets instituted 24 mishmarot, right? Guards. And this in cases like, watches. If you've ever talked about like the watches of the night, it's where the word watch comes from when we talk about the thing on our wrist, right? So this is, you would divide up the night into first watch, second watch, third watch. And this was how it was done as well for the temple. For each mishmar, for each watch, there was a ma'amad, meaning there were those who would stand up, right? Those who were responsible, those whose duty it was for that segment of time, meaning at the temple in Jerusalem, consisting of priests, Levites, and Israelites. When the time came for the mishmar to go up to Jerusalem, the priests and Levites went up to Jerusalem, and the Israelites of that mishmar assembled in their cities and read the story of creation. All right, so your week for your group has come. If you are a Kohen or a Levi from that group, you go to Jerusalem. If you are a regular Israelite, a subgroup, says the Talmud, will go. But the majority of you are going to gather in your cities, right? It is your time to get together and do this very special reading of Bereshit. And we'll talk about that in just a second, but I want to make sure we've got this full understanding before we get into the reading from creation, which is what's going to be Mishnah 3.
This is only for the Bereshit, or so that's mean only once every 7 years?
No. So the year is divided into 24, or rather the people are divided into 24 segments. When it is your turn your group's turn, if you're not one of the groups that go up to Jerusalem, I mean, you're not a Kohen, not a Levi, and you're not one of the representatives of your group going, you stay regardless of which time of the year it is, and you are going to do a special reading of the book of the beginning of Bereshit, the account of creation.
But when? At a specific moment?
When it's your turn, when your group is there. Basically, your group is in Jerusalem, and you're at home with your community, and you're doing this special service in your community.
So what happens if someone that need to go to Jerusalem is a farmer? The community take responsibility of take care of the land and everything for that person during the time that he's in Jerusalem?
So, you're not there forever. You're only there for like a couple of weeks. But yes, the community would help each other if people had to leave to do this service. It's think of it like National Guard duty in the United States. If it's your turn to serve for your weeks of the year, then you go and your boss doesn't fire you and your community manages while you're away. But like I said, the vast majority of people wouldn't be going anywhere, but they still need to have this spiritual connection to what's happening during their time, because they are the ones providing for this week, right? They are the ones who are on duty. Aaron?
Yes, Rabbi. You said the Israelites would send representatives to Jerusalem?
Right. The Talmud fills us in that the Israelites, it wasn't everybody who was an Israelite of this ma'amad, of this group that went. It would be just representatives of them, because otherwise it would be too much. Yeah.
But was it all the Kohanim and all the Levites? Did all of them have their own section, or did they send representatives too?
No, the presumption was anybody who was fit to go, meaning they were ritually pure and able to serve. They would all of those who were fit would go. Okay. What is this story of Bereshit? What, I mean, like Natan showed, this sounds really weird that we're just reading from Maaseh Bereshit, which, by the way, is the official title for the section of the Torah that is the 7 days of creation. What's going on here? Well, the men of the Ma'amad fasted on 4 days of that week, from Monday to Thursday. Now, this is a daytime fast, right? You're not going 4 days without food. This is a fast where you can eat while it's dark, but you can't eat while it's day. They did not fast on Friday out of respect for Shabbat, right? You had to get ready for Shabbat and, of course, eat in the evening, nor on Sunday, in order not to switch from rest and delight, meaning Shabbat's joy, to weariness and fasting. And many versions of the Mishnah include the warning and die, meaning that going from the joy of Shabbat to a straight fast day could be hazardous to your health. Not every version of the Mishnah includes that phrase, but the basic rule is still the same, which is Friday you can eat normally, Shabbat you can eat normally, Sunday you can eat normally. The other days of the week, when it is your turn, you are fasting during the daylight hours. That shows your seriousness and focus on that moment.
But that fasting is because the lack of rain, or just because you need to be there in the temple?
This is a fasting to show your connection to what's happening in the temple. This has nothing to do with the rain now.
And for 24 hours day?
No. For 24-hour days, but the fast is not 24 hours.
Ah, okay, it's half day.
The daylight fast.
Oh, okay.
You know, what we call in the modern vernacular a minor fast day, right? Doesn't mean it's less important. It just means the duration of the fast is only during daytime. It's actually very similar, you may have noticed, to the way the Muslims also fast during Ramadan. Right? When the Muslims fast for a month, they don't like stop eating for a month. They stop eating during the daytime for a month. Aaron, I see your hand. Aaron? Did you mute yourself accidentally?
Is this everybody fasting, or is it just the priests?
No, this is everybody who is part of that ma'amad, that group of people.
And it's not just the representative, it's literally everyone.
Literally everyone in that group.
All right.
Okay. On Sunday, right, the first day of the week, they read in the beginning, let there be a firmament. On Monday, let there be a firmament and let the waters be gathered together. On Tuesday, let the waters gather together and let there be lights. On Wednesday, let there be lights and let the waters swarm. On Thursday, let the waters swarm and let the earth bring forth. On Friday, let the earth bring forth, and the heavens and earth were completed. All right, so what are we recognizing here? What's the basic pattern? This is the story of creation.
Yes.
Right? And it's laid out, mapped to basically the days of the week. Now, there's a little bit of an exception in the sense that what happens on Shabbat, right, what we now recognize as Vayachulu, is being read as on Friday as well. So there isn't a special reading on Shabbat. There's just this happening during the days of the regular week. Special rule about reading: for a long section, 2 people read, and for a short section, 1 person. Right? This is how they would read at Shacharit and Musaf. So they are reading from the Torah, a special reading completely unconnected to what we would recognize as the weekly parasha of the week. And they are reading this because it is their group's turn to be connected to the temple during their representatives, Kohanim, Leviim, and Israelites that are in the temple precinct at this very time, at this very moment.
Who
Now,
was reading the Kohanim and the Leviim, not the Israel?
No, this is happening in your town, not at the temple.
But I understood that not everyone could read the Torah without the vows and everything.
Well, that's true. Not everyone can, but enough people could that you would be able to get people to read together, because what are they reading? They're reading one of the most famous sections of the entire Torah. Right? This is the section that a lot of people would know. Additionally, as you can see, they're not long sections, right? Each day is very short. In fact, some sections are so short that if they want to have more than one person read, they have to repeat one of the verses in order to make sure everybody can read at least 3 verses. That's always been the minimum, says the rabbis, for a Torah reading, is if you read from the Torah, you have to read a minimum of 3 verses. So there is this breakdown in order to make sure that it can be divided up and to make sure that everyone reads at least a minimum of 3. Now, they read from the Torah itself from the Shacharit and Musaf services, but at Mincha they assemble and read the section by heart as they recite the Shema. Right? It's harder to get burdensome sounds so negative. It is a lot of trouble to get the Torah out and to bring it together and to read it in this communal way. So they would just recite it by straight memory during the Mincha service, the same way that we could recite the Shema just by memory at the Mincha service. And on Friday at Mincha, they do not assemble out of respect for Shabbat. Right? So as the day is finishing up, they would not do this special reading. They'd have Mincha like normal, but they would not do this special reading because everyone was busy getting ready for Shabbat, and they didn't want to do this additional time. So they only did the reading at Shacharit and Musaf.
And Mincha by memory only because they didn't have Minyan. So that's why.
No, Mincha by memory because they didn't have the time, the energy, the ability to do it with the Torah itself. It was a bigger deal to do it with the Torah.
I thought because everyone is working and they didn't have Minyan, so that's why they couldn't take out the Torah, and that's why they say by memory.
That was not the explanation that I read, but
that's an explanation of Rabbi Natan.
I see.
No, because I thought, really, when you read that, I thought that was the reason. I didn't know that the reason is because they were exhausted.
No, so it's like if I asked you right now to read the Shema Ve'ahavta, and I gave you, and you don't have books, right? You only have the Torah. How long would it take you to read the Shema Ve'ahavta if you had to go looking for it in the Torah? And how long would it take you to read if I just asked you to recite it by memory? Right? It's just a completely different level of involvement. But you're right, the level of involvement was cut back because people were busy. Right? You couldn't really just afford usually to take off the middle of the day and go sit in the synagogue. That's a luxury that many of us can enjoy, but even still not always. And in the ancient world, even fewer people would have the ability to take off too much time from their daily work. All right, let's keep going. I'm beginning to doubt we're going to finish, but we'll see. We may have to finish next week. Okay, Mishnah 4. On any day where there is Hallel, there was no Ma'amad at Shacharit. On a day when there is a Musaf offering, there was no Ma'amad at Ne'ilah. On the day of the wood offering, there was no Ma'amad at Mincha. The words of Rabbi Akiva. All right. This is going to feel a little confusing, so we'll do the best we can, but don't sweat it if you can't quite get it.
And the Mamadim are in the temple.
No, this is for everyone.
Or the Mamadim here is for the people in the temple and also in the towns.
If it is your Ma'amad's turn, right? If you are on the Mishmar for this time, then you have special prayers that you're saying, even if you're not at Jerusalem. Right? This is part of being in Jerusalem, even when you're not in Jerusalem. You are still doing a special service that reflects the special service that's happening in Jerusalem that your group of people are participating in. So, because this happens every day, all week, every month, every year, there are going to be days where other things are happening. For example, there will be days when we recite Hallel. When Hallel is recited, we don't do the normal Ma'amad activities during Shacharit, right? When there is a Musaf offering, there is no Ma'amad at the Ne'ilah, meaning near the end of the day, the special service that would be added during these fast days. Now, when is there a Hallel but no Musaf? This is one of the great Jewish trivia questions about liturgy. When do we do Hallel but not Musaf? Anyone want to write down their answer?
In Sukkot?
No, we do because we do the shaking of the lulav during Hallel. So we definitely have a Musaf. We definitely have Hallel. I'll give you a hint. The other Shlosh Regalim are also Hallel and Musaf.
Okay, so what's the another?
Rosh Chodesh, we do Hallel and Musaf, although we do a half Hallel.
Yeah.
That's right.
So which one not?
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah, there is not Hallel. Yes,
No,
right.
Hanukkah there is Hallel, but no Musaf.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because there are no sacrifices associated with Hanukkah. That's why when we read from the Torah for the Hanukkah readings, it's not talking about giving an offering. We don't read from chapter 28 of Bamidbar of Numbers. We read from the offerings that were brought by the princes of the people. We read a special section of the Torah that doesn't mention anything about Hanukkah because, of course, Hanukkah happened long after the Torah was finished. Anyway, that was just a little trivia. Wood offering we're going to talk about in Mishnah 5, so we're just going to skip that at the moment. But I want to point out that this was the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai said to Rabbi Akiva, thus did Rabbi Joshua learn. I mean, Rabbi Joshua taught this a little different. On the day when there is a Musaf offering, there was no Ma'amad at Mincha. On the day of the wood offering, there was no Ma'amad at Ne'ilah. So it basically shifts the categories a little bit, right? If there was Musaf, we don't do Ma'amad at Mincha, whereas what Rabbi Akiva had said was that if there was Musaf, there was no Ma'amad at Ne'ilah. And with the wood offering, Rabbi Akiva had said there was no Ma'amad at Mincha. And for Rabbi Joshua, when there's a wood offering, there was no Ma'amad at Ne'ilah instead. So they've changed it slightly from that. And Rabbi Akiva retracts and learned like Ben Azai, meaning Rabbi Akiva changed his opinion. He agreed with what Ben Azai had taught, and then he began to teach it that way as well. I don't want to go into the whole details of why. You want to look in the Talmud. Again, all you have to do is click on this in Sefaria. You go to the Talmud, click on the Talmud reading, and boom, you can go and look at how they actually argue this out. Not for us, but you can go and see why they discuss these different intricacies. But I do want to focus on, scroll down, is that Rabbi Akiva was willing to change his opinion based off the interpretation. Yes, Natan.
What's the relationship between the Ma'amadim and the Hallel?
So
what is the connection between them?
So that I'm going to ask you to go look in the Gemara more fully, but the basic issue is Hallel is a day of great rejoicing, whereas the Ma'amad was a day when we were fasting and being very serious. So there was a conflict of emotion.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about the wood, right? What are we talking about wood? The times of the wood of the priests and the people was 9. If this sounds weird, you're absolutely right. This is not something that most of us are familiar with because most of us don't bring wood to the temple. So this was, a special time when wood would be brought to the temple. On the 1st of Nisan, the family of Arav Yehuda. On the 20th of Tammuz, the family of David of Yehuda. On the 5th of Av, the family of Parosh of Yehuda. On the 7th of the same month, meaning of Av, the family of Yonadav of Rechav. On the 10th of the same month, the family of Tzna of Benjamin. On the 15th of the same month, the family of Zatu of Yehuda. And with them were the priests and Levites and all those who were not certain of their tribe, and the family of Gonve Eli, and the family of Kotzei Ketziot. On the 20th of the same month, the family of Pahat Moab of Yehuda. On the 20th of Elul, the family of Adin of Yehuda. On the 1st of Tevet, the family of Parosh of Yehuda offered a second time. On the 1st of Tevet, there was no Ma'amad, for there was Hallel and Musaf and the wood festival. Okay, what in the world is going on here? Short version. Again, you can go and look for the citations. Let's remind everybody, you can look at the citations here, either in the Talmud or in our lovely English explanation down here, which talks about all of these lovely different people and where you can find about these people in the Tanakh, because all of them are mentioned throughout the Tanakh, but especially, as you can see, they are mentioned during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? There's a little bit before that as well, but the vast majority are mentioned there. So these are basically different families that have had a special relationship with the bringing of the wood, again, mostly during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, during the rebuilding of the temple. And therefore, they were honored by becoming the only people who could bring during this time. They had special permission to be the wood bringers for the temple, and each got a special time when they could bring their wood. This duty was reserved to them because, again, you can go through the commentary. Each of them had a different special connection to this mitzvah. Yes, Eric.
Hey, Rabbi, isn't that a little different than what we learned in Shekalim, where everybody brought the same amount because they wanted everybody to have an equal part in the offering? So
when it came to the chetzi shekel, the half shekel, you're absolutely right. When it comes to this particular act of bringing the wood, since it wasn't mandated by the Torah that all of us would all be equally responsible, the different leaders at these times instituted that these families had special privilege because of their past commitment.
But I mean, that's the same wood they'd use to burn the sacrifices, right?
Yes, but not the sacrifice itself. All right. You know what? We're getting close to spitting distance. I think we can maybe just finish. Let's try and see what we can do. You may have been wondering why, when we've been studying Taanit, all of these fast days, and we talked about all of the rain and all of that, we didn't mention anything about the fast days that we still observe, right? All the fast days we've talked about before were the fast days that were associated with your special lot of work at the temple, or the fast days instituted because of the lack of rain. Where's Tisha B'Av, right? Where is the 17th of Tammuz? Where are the fast days that we know? Very end of chapter 4, we find it. There were 5 events that happened to our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 on the 9th of Av. Right? The 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were shattered, meaning Moses broke the tablets. The Tamid, the daily offering, was canceled, meaning during the siege, it was no longer able to offer the sacrifice because they ran out of animals. The walls of the city were breached, and Apastomos burned the Torah and placed an idol in the temple. Most commentators say this is happening during the Hellenistic period, like in the days of the Maccabees. But that's actually debated a little bit, but we'll leave it for that. On the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, it was decreed that our ancestors should not enter the land, right? After the spies came back and gave the bad report and everybody followed them, God said, 40 years, you're going to be stuck out here. The temple was destroyed the first and the second time, meaning first temple and second temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av. Beitar was captured. Beitar was the last stronghold of the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans in 136, and it lost. And this was their final place that was destroyed. And the city was plowed up, meaning the city of Jerusalem was turned into a heap, which happened much later than the original destruction. When Av enters, they limit their rejoicing, meaning that as the month of Av begins, we stop being as happy. We reduce the number of things we would normally do that make us happy. Now, modern day halakha, and has been halakha for quite some time, we actually begin reducing our joy earlier than that. That's why there's sort of a blackout section where we don't do weddings beginning with the 17th of Tammuz. So that has become more stringent in the modern world, modern meaning like last 1,000 years. That I want you to hold in mind as we move into number 7. During the week in which the 9th of Av falls, it is forbidden to cut the hair and to wash clothes, but on Thursday it is permitted in honor of Shabbat. On the 9th of Av, one should not eat a meal of 2 cooked dishes, nor should he eat meat or drink wine. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says one should make change, meaning that if you normally eat 2 cooked meals, you should have 1 cooked meal. Rabbi Judah obligated turning over the bed, but the sages did not agree with him. Turning over the bed meant to sleep in a much more uncomfortable position. All right. Anybody who is currently up on how we observe Tisha B'Av and the time before it, does this seem familiar?
Yes.
Yes, but it is much less strict than we currently observe.
Oh, yes.
Right now, we stop cutting our hair long before the month of Av. Right now, we stop eating meat at the beginning of the month of Av. Here, we're only not eating meat in that week of Tisha B'Av, the same week of it. And we are still eating meat on Shabbat. So this is a much more lenient form of mourning the destructions. And over time, people began to add additional layers of stringency to expand how we kept the memory of the destruction still more visceral, more available to us as an emotional connection, which should not be surprising because the people who were there and who lived in the immediate aftermath, they were much more aware of the destruction on a day-to-day basis. But as this has gone through our history and has faded perhaps from our personal experience, then we needed, I believe, additional stringency to keep this as something that is closer to our heart. Aaron, I think I saw your hand go up first.
Yeah, it went up for a second. So the back to Spanish Inquisition, that happened a long time ago, and it
Yes.
seems like we almost have nothing to remind people of the Spanish Inquisition, which some people say was even worse than the Holocaust.
When did the Spanish Inquisition begin?
15
around that.
it got bad, right?
No, which day?
No, it was the 9th of Av.
On Tisha B'Av.
Hmm.
So on Tisha B'Av, we also commemorate the destruction to our communities and the loss of life that happened during the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain. So that is, however, a very big question. In the modern world, when Israel was established as a state in 1948, and the shadow of the Holocaust was still so huge, of whether or not to mourn the destruction of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, on Tisha B'Av, or whether it needed its own day. The eventual compromise was to create its own day, which the state of Israel labeled not only as commemorating the Holocaust, but also commemorating the heroes that tried to fight back I mean, they were all heroes, everybody who perished, but those who were able to take up arms against the Nazis were also singled out for special remembrance on that day. Now, long term, people have tended to focus more and more only on the destruction aspect and less on the partisans and the rebels against the Nazis. But that was one of the reasons why the early state wanted to make its own day for the Shoah rather than only commemorating it on Tisha B'Av. And there are still some ultra-Orthodox groups that do not recognize Yom HaShoah, the day of remembering the Holocaust, and do their mourning for the Holocaust only on Tisha B'Av, or the 17th of Tammuz was also suggested by others.
But the rebels, was that just the Warsaw Uprising? That's the only one I heard of about the...
No, there were many Jews, but the Warsaw Ghetto was the largest single uprising. There were many camp breakouts and uprisings at different concentration camps, and there were many Jews who served either from Europe that served in the partisans and the different underground movements, or who went to Europe either from Israel or elsewhere to try and help as well. Hannah Senesh being the most famous of that group.
Yeah, but those weren't rebels. Those were literal military fighters, right?
I guess it depends on your definition of a rebel. You know,
they were guerrilla forces.
I mean, yeah, they were not like members of a full normal military. It wasn't like, you know, the American Secret Services, you know, special forces going in. These were people who were given training, but they were given training by paramilitary groups, guerrilla forces, exactly. So I don't want to split hairs about what counts as a rebel and what counts as a guerrilla and what counts as special forces. Okay, so 8, we're going to finish. Yay! Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, there were no days of joy in Israel greater than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. We've made it to a happy time, and one that's very appropriate, which is why I was glad you selected Taanit for this study. There were no days greater than the 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, and Yom Kippur. Why? Well, the first one is what gets the bulk of our explanation. On these days, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in borrowed white garments in order not to shame anyone who had none. Right? All of these garments required immersion. So all the women who are unmarried are dressing up in white, and they are dressing up all the same. So nobody has fancy clothes and other people have ugly clothes. And they are all going out. Now, this would happen both on Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. Indeed, because of Yom Kippur, this issue on Yom Kippur is one of the things that leads many to believe this is why we read from the laws about forbidden incestuous relationships during the mincha service of Yom Kippur, so that people remember you can't marry your sister no matter how pretty she looks when she's dressed all in white. The daughters of Jerusalem come out and dance in the vineyards. What would they say? Young man, lift up your eyes and see what you choose for yourself. Do not set your eyes on beauty, but set your eyes on the family. Grace is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Taken from near the end of Eshet Chayil in the book of Proverbs. And further says, give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. All right, so basically the women are going out and saying, hey, I'm available to get married. Don't judge me entirely on my looks. See what family I come from. See that I am coming from a respectable, good place that has a family that is righteous and that is God-fearing. That's what you should be looking for in a bride. So this was a matchmaking holiday, both the 15th of Av and the afternoon of Yom Kippur. Similarly, it says, O maidens of Zion, go forth and gaze upon King Solomon wearing the crown that his mother gave him on his wedding day, on the day of gladness of his heart. Taken from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. On his wedding day, this refers to Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. And on the day of gladness of his heart, this refers to the building of the temple. May it be rebuilt speedily in our days. Amen. Right? So this ends with this midrash about the day of our wedding being when we married God, when we became God's bride, if you will, through the giving of the contract of the Torah, through the giving of the Ten Commandments, and the day of gladness, when were we fully fulfilled, when we also had the temple built. Of course, we've just spent the last two Mishnayot talking about the destruction, so we have to obviously end on a high note, saying that we hope that it will be rebuilt soon. Now, there may be one last thing that you are noticing has been missing, which is this really the only reason Yom Kippur is considered a happy day? Because people would be, doing a little matchmaking? Of course not. Yom Kippur is also considered the happiest day on the calendar because it is the day when we feel fully cleaned and refreshed and ready before our God. And it is an experience that you can't get any other day of the year, because as soon as Yom Kippur is done, we're already making mistakes. But on Yom Kippur, if you've done your due diligence of reviewing yourself, your life, and made your apologies to each other as well as to God, it is a feeling of relief and lightness, of being completely unburdened, unlike any other day of the year. All right, any other questions before we say goodbye to Mishnah Taanit? All right, so I think what we're going to do, since we don't have another Masechet for next week, and I can predict that I am going to be going a little crazy, is we're going to go ahead and take next week off. And if I'm not mistaken, that means we'll be able to, where's my calendar? Next week is the 23rd, and that means we could come back together again on the 30th. All right, so you can,
which one is the chosen one?
well, we haven't picked one. So I am open for emails of ones you'd like. If you don't let me know, then I will send something to the WhatsApp, or you can email me if you want to get it through that way. Whatever I pick is what we'll do next. But I love teaching what you guys are interested in rather than just dropping it on you. So you've got a week to make a suggestion. Otherwise, I'll choose for myself next week.
Can you choose earlier? Because if I don't have the Masechet, I need to buy it, and I want that it will have in my house by the time that we have the next year.
All right, so we'll see. If I haven't gotten any suggestions before the end of Rosh Hashanah, which is coming up very soon, then I'll go ahead and let everyone know what we're doing.
Perfect.
After all, we pick whatever Natan wants.
Not always. I'm always open for other people to make suggestions.
No, they're
But
good. They're good
Natan
conversations.
has made good suggestions, and I'm happy to go with his as well. But I'm always open for things that interest others as well. All right,
thank you.
everyone, take care. Shana Tova. Thank you for working your way through another Masechet, and I look forward to tackling the next one together in 2 weeks.
Now,
Thank
now we need to celebrate because
Well,
we finish a Masechet.
we absolutely, and normally it'd be great to get together and do a siyum every time we finish. But
Well,
we'll have to settle for just Rosh Hashanah.
Rabbi, if we could do it at the sukkah, that would be great.
Well, I
But-
can't promise we're not going to finish another Masechet by the time Sukkot rolls around.
But you know what, Rabbi, now I'm thinking about, we are missing a great opportunity really to celebrate in the community and teach what is learning Talmud or Mishnah if we do a celebration after every siyum.
Let's talk about that as we begin our next one.
Yeah, so maybe we need after finish the